Welcome back to another episode of Profitable Publishing. Today we're going to be talking about publishing red flags. Now, this is for authors who are looking at hiring somebody to publish their book, whether it be someone who is a self-publishing consultant like myself or an independent publisher. This is not for people who are looking to do the traditional publishing route because that's a whole different ballgame. As well, if you're looking at hybrid publishing, where you're sharing some of the responsibilities and some of the payments there, then this would be a great episode for you as well. So I'm Ashley. I'm a self-publishing consultant and book marketing strategist and also an author of 5 books. And I support coaches, consultants, speakers, and service providers to be able to package their expertise into a profitable book that builds their brands. And I did a video about this. Actually, I did a reel about this and I went to go look and see because it's from a long time ago. And it's 2022, and it was just a reel off the top of my head of just like, okay, if these are the things that your publisher is doing, you in danger, girl. Like from the movie Ghost from the 90s. I thought, okay, let me revisit this because I'm starting to see more of the conversation of, okay, well, I hired a publisher and then they did this, this, and this, and now I feel like I got scammed. Or they did XYZ and I didn't know that was going to happen, and now I don't know what to do. And so in the world of publishing, in this bubble I'm talking about, independent publishing, self-publishing, hybrid publishing, publishing consultants, it's very easy to get overwhelmed by all the different options because there are tons of them. So if you haven't already checked out the last episode 15, then I do encourage you to take a listen to that because I share some of the different options of the ways in which you can publish. But today we're going to talk about red flags to look out for, things to avoid, and also to really be able to protect yourself in the process because you are entering a business agreement with someone else, whether it's an individual or another company. And so you want to really make sure that you protect yourself when you're going through this process. And so I'm going to give you some tips and things to look out for. Now, with this, once again, this is not for people who are doing traditional publishing. That's a different process. And so these rules don't necessarily apply. And I say rules loosely, air quotes, because when you are independently published, when you are self-published with support, or you are working with a hybrid publisher, then the parameters are a little different. And so saying all that to say that the things we'll talk about today apply to that group of people who hire someone to help them publish their book, essentially who we're focusing on. And so when you are looking at your contract, first of all, making sure you have a contract with the company is so important because that protects you and it protects the person. It just really establishes those clear boundaries and those clear outlines of, okay, when you do this, we're going to do this. When this happens, and this is going to happen. And it also gives you some structure around in case emergencies happen. So for example, I've had a couple clients who they've had like really, really large life changes during their time of working with me. And so for one, she lost her father, and then another one, she had like a medical emergency or something. A medical emergency for her and a diagnosis that she hadn't anticipated. And so within the contract, I have a clause that says, okay, well, if you need to take a break, you can have X amount of time, and or when you come back, then we're going to get your book done in this way. We'll work you back into the existing kind of queue that we have. And then also like a ghosting clause of like, okay, if you fell off the face of the earth and I cannot find you, this is the time period that you have until I'm going to say, okay, well, your project is complete, or you have time to kind of reactivate that. So it depends on the situation. Having those things in place are important because it gives protection for you as the customer and the company as a business. And with your contract, you of course want to read it very thoroughly. You want to really understand what each of the clauses mean so that you know what you're signing and not just signing things blindly. And you also want to look and see and make sure it aligns with your goals. So one thing I notice is that when people feel like they're getting scammed, and not to say that there's not scammers, because there definitely are scammers, but I have seen a pattern of authors seeing, okay, well, this is what I thought it was going to be. And then when I go back and look at my contract, that's not what it is. But now I'm like, I feel some kind of way. And the thing is, at the end of the day, you signed off on this thing, you agreed to this thing. However, it is something you should definitely address with them. And so being really crystal clear about, okay, the ways in which they've structured things, I'm okay with those. And if not, reach out to them, see if they can make adjustments to it, or move on to a different publisher because maybe that one is not a good option for you. Another thing you want to look at in your contract is timelines, and making sure that the timelines that are within there are realistic for you and also in alignment with the rest of your book's project. Now, for example, if you are doing editing, That's not always included in the packages for independent publishers or hybrid publishers or self-publishing consultants. It really just depends on your package. And so making sure that you can meet the deadlines that are given. If, for example, let's say the wording stated, okay, well, you have X amount of days to give us your rough draft, or you have this much time to connect with the editor that we have that's quote unquote in-house, or that we use in contract with. And then if you don't, then this thing happens. And so being really clear and understanding what those timelines are and making sure you can meet those timelines. And then same thing with the next type of work submission or giving feedback. And so, for example, for my clients, we do 24 to 48 hours in feedback for drafts and things like that. And partially that's because we typically publish people in 90 days. And so when you're doing that, that's a somewhat aggressive timeline. After your drafting is done, after your editing is done, then typically the rest we can knock out in 90 days. And so with that, we want to make sure that we are able to keep our timeline to keep the promises to you. So if you as a client are not able to turn things in during that certain timeline, then your publisher might say, okay, well, we didn't get these things until then, so this pushed everything back. And so just being mindful that that's a part of the process. All right, so those are general tips, but now I want to get into the red flags. So the first red flag is that when you actually sign on with the publisher, finding out that your rights are not your own. And so this can be really devastating, and it can be something that you might not realize and might not kind of understand. And so you want to make sure in your contract, in your agreement, whatever the case may be, that you have a very clear wording that says, okay, that you, the author, or you, the business owner, are the owner of your book. And I know that might sound wild, because why wouldn't you be the owner of your book? But when it comes to things like your copyright, when it comes to things like your ISBNs, you want to make sure that you are the one who owns those things. When it comes to your files, you want to make sure that you have your files at the end or midway, whenever your stuff is done. You want to make sure that you have your files so that way if you need to print with a different printer or you need to make changes, you don't have to come back to the original publisher. And you might be thinking, well, I don't mind coming back to them. However, things change. Sometimes publishers close down. Sometimes people have personal things going on and they're not able to complete the process that you would like done within a certain time frame. And so having your files yourself just make it a lot easier to not have to worry about that. And then when it comes to your ISBN, you want to make sure that those are inside of your Bowker account if you're in the United States. And if you're across the world, there's different sites you would use for that are based upon your area. And some places have free ISBNs, but that's another story for another day. You want to make sure that you are the owner, you are the one who is the owner of the ISBNs, and then also that your imprint is the one that is listed inside of Bowker, because that's going to send information to Amazon, it's going to send information to Ingram Spark and any place you distribute that, okay, this is under this publishing company. And one thing that can happen, especially with vanity presses, which are typically who you're going to want to not work with, is that they will put their name on there and then your name is not on there. So like your name will be on there, but in terms of the imprint, the ISBN, it's under their name. And then also with the copyright, you do get some level of copyright protection as soon as you create something. However, actually filing with the Copyright Office, if you're here in the United States, filing with the Copyright Office, the U.S. Copyright Office is an extra level of protection. And then if you're in different parts of the world, they may also have different ones that are adjacent that you should consider applying for as well. And so making sure that that has your name on it and it's not someone else's will help to ensure that you are the true owner of your book, as opposed to just the writer with someone else kind of taking over. And then the next red flag is having to wait until a check is mailed to you once a quarter to know how much money you have made. And so this is something that comes from traditional publishing. However, when you are not doing traditional publishing, you don't have to wait on that timeline. So for example, the authors I work with, they are able to literally log in every day and see how much money they've made every day. And they don't have to wait for that once a quarter, because that's one of the benefits of being a self-published author, an indie published author, is that you have the ability to be able to track your data. And this is so important, especially if you are launching a book, because you want to be able to tie certain things to that information. Or let's say you're doing a promo. You won't necessarily be able to track the information for your promo. You won't be able to track like your book sold if your book is is where the publisher is giving you royalties, because instead of having the book inside your KDP dashboard, inside your Ingham Spark dashboard, and on your website, that means that it's on their website. It's on their website, it's on their KDP, their Ingham Spark. So they are actually tabulating how much you get per quarter, when in actuality, you could be finding that out on a daily basis. And so you won't have that flexibility if you are in a contract with the publishing company where they are hosting your books inside of their Amazon, Ingham Spark, etc. platforms. It could be encouraging to say, okay, well, all right, I did this promotion, I have this spike of sales, or I did this and I didn't quite see the results I want to see. You don't even have that option if you are working with a publisher who will do the distribution every quarter. And so once again, this is not having to do with traditional publishing. This is with the indie and self-publishing, because the rules for traditional publishing are slightly different, or the expectations are slightly different. Now, if you are someone who knows that you want self-publishing support, you want independent publishing support, you want to be able to have your book be something that attracts your readers, to be able to build your authority and tie to your products and services, then I do encourage you to check out the Profitable Publishing Partner Service. And so this is where I work with you to be able to make sure your book is designed in a way that it attracts sales as well as keeps readers reading, because most people don't actually finish the books that they read. And so we go through the process of writing, publishing, and marketing your book in order to be able to attract those buyers and to build out your brand. And so you can visit profitableselfpublishing.com/partner, and I'll put the link in the show notes to be able to get more information about that. All right, back to these red flags. So having to order your author copies through the publisher is another red flag. There are some people who might think, okay, well, this is actually kind of nice. Like, I can order copies from them, and then that way they are taking care of that part for me. But in actuality, it's really something you can do yourself, and the amount of work that you would have to take to order it from them, you could really just order it from the distributors yourself. And when I say distributors, I mean Amazon, KDP, Ingham Spark, or if you're having a printer, that's a little bit more complicated process. However, typically what I'm talking about is from the print-on-demand companies, so the Amazons, the Ingham Sparks. And so back when I first was starting doing this work, I would meet with people and they would say, okay, well, how many copies of my book will I get inside of my package? And we're on like a sales call, and I'm thinking like, I don't include copies of your book with your package. And some of them were like, what? Like, I still have to order books after this? So I realized that that was an expectation for people. But then once I explained to them that, in all honesty, the companies that are including the books as a part of your package are doing two things. They're rolling the price of the books inside of your package. So just like with Amazon Prime, thinking about, this is 2-day shipping, it's free shipping. But in actuality, they're rolling the price of those products they're rolling the price of shipping into the products. So that's why you might notice that things typically cost a little bit more on Amazon than they do in like a general store. And so they're rolling the cost in. Then another thing is that they are upcharging you. So they might say, okay, well, you can get your copies for $6 or whatever the case may be, and you'll pay that price to them. But in actuality, your book is typically not going to cost more than about $4 or $5 on somewhat of the high end. I have books that just cost $2. It depends on a couple different factors. But the publishers that are rolling it in typically are also upcharging you, and so they're charging you more than it actually costs. Whereas with a self-publishing consultant like myself, then you actually have the ability to log in and do that yourself. So you can log in, you can order as many as you want. Amazon KDP does have a limit on the amount per order, and it's $999. But you can do as many orders as you want to of that. And honestly, if you're going to do that many, if you're going to do the $9.99 multiple times, you might just want to go with a printer, but you get what I'm saying. So understanding that, yes, it's a convenience for people to include books, but also really realizing like you can order books yourself. The same process you might do with the publisher, you can just do yourself to be able to log in and do that. It's your book, and so it's your choice for you to be able to order books when you want to be able to map out your process. And so when the publisher is taking that away from you, then it's like, okay, I have to go through another hoop. I have to step over another hurdle. Where in actuality, independent publishing and self-publishing, part of that is because you want to have control, you want to have that creative freedom and that creative direction. You want to be able to order books at 2 a.m. when you're working on something, and you can't do that with having the publisher house the books inside their platforms. If the publisher orders it, it's the same process that you would be doing. All right, now our next red flag is one that I feel like should be included. Some people might disagree with this one, but not providing marketing support. So if you're working with a publisher and they haven't said anything to you about marketing, they're not doing any kind of marketing with you, they're not doing anything to think about how your marketing ties into the book, then to me, that's a red flag. So another thing to note, that traditionally published books typically do not include the marketing support. And that's something I'm seeing multiple times online, is people are just really surprised that, like, oh, okay, well, I was traditionally published, or I got signed up for a book deal, they paid my advance, all that, yada yada. But then, like, I did not get any help with marketing. Like, the marketing department didn't reach out to me, and I just think that, like, that's not fair. And when you look at their packages, it doesn't say anything about marketing. Like, you're just assuming that that is a part of your package just because you're working with this company. But if you didn't sign up for that, then that's not going to be what happens. And I've had that too in terms of, like, clients. For example, I had a client that was asking me about hosting events. However, the package that she signed up for was about pre-orders. And so I gave some general information, but then as she kept asking more questions, I let her know, like, hey, this is a separate option. This isn't really tied into what it is that we're doing. And so I'd be happy to coach you through that through a separate service. But for now, like, I can't answer this in this detail because it's outside of the scope of our project. Like, I'll point you in the right direction, I'll give you tips and things like that, but it can't be an ongoing coaching situation if you haven't paid for that. And so same thing, if you haven't paid for the marketing, typically they're not going to provide the marketing for you. Now, of course, if you're a bigger name, that's a different story. But for us smaller authors, that's typically not going to be the case. They're not going to go out of their way to market your book. They will do things like store placements, and some people consider that to be marketing. However, to me, it's placements. It's not necessarily marketing your book. At the end of the day, publishing and marketing are two separate things, but at least providing some type of guidance or some pointing you in the right direction, some type of suggested next steps, even if it looks like connecting you with someone else that does the marketing, to me is a sign that the publisher actually cares about your book selling, as opposed to just, okay, you want to publish the book, all right, we'll get it done, no problem. At the end, you're done and you have a book, as opposed to, is this book actually selling? There are times when authors are like, okay, well, I published a book, now what? Now it's not selling, or now this happened, and now it's stagnant. So, like, my launch sales were good, and then like a month later, nothing's happening. And part of that is because there's not a plan for marketing in place. So understanding that plan before your book is finalized makes it a lot easier to be able to get those results. So for example, let's say your goal might be to sell a lot of books. Or maybe your goal is to make money. I was speaking with an author on Instagram in the DMs, and she mentioned that she wants to use her book to build her brand authority, to be able to attract her readers, and then also to really kind of capture her expertise or capture her framework. And so with that, there's certain things that she would want to do that help to embed the marketing process into her publishing process. And once again, I understand marketing and publishing are different. However, marketing is informed by your publishing, and your publishing is informed by your marketing. So they work together. There's certain things that she could do inside of her book that would make it a lot easier for people to actually take action, and I actually share some of these with you all. So in episode 10, how to write a good book that readers can't put down, I actually go through one of the strategies using touch points of how to keep your reader engaged. And so this is a strategy she can incorporate because it helps the people who are reading the book to actually do some type of action. And coming just from an educational background, this helps them to be able to have a deeper understanding of what it is that the strategy is trying to teach or trying to show you. And that's one example of embedding the marketing into the publishing. It's a little bit more covert. It's not something that's just like, oh, buy my book posts, which I don't recommend doing those all the time anyway. Or it's something where you are embedding the marketing inside of your publishing as a part of the process. You're not waiting until your book is finished, until it's in your hand, to start letting people know about it. And so this next one is more so like a nice to have. I wouldn't necessarily call it a red flag, but I will say that it does affect your bottom line. And so not prioritizing profit or your ecosystem. And so if you're someone who is a coach, consultant, service provider, or speaker, you have a framework, you have an ecosystem likely or you're in the process of developing one, that is going to house the things that are important to getting a result based upon your processes. And so let's say you are someone who focuses on like dog training or something. Maybe you're like a luxury dog trainer. And so you have a system that you use in order to be able to train the dogs, not to go to the bathroom in the house, in order to help like puppies make a transition. And so packaging that up into a book means that you have a couple different options. You want to be mindful of that book actually being in alignment with what your goals are. And so does the way that this book is written and published, does it fit with your ecosystem? So if you're someone who works with people who are busy or on the go, is the formatting choice that you're selecting the best fit for the person who's going to be reading the book? For example, when I released my cookbook, I asked my audience, do you prefer hardcover, spiral, or premium paperback? And they said spiral. So that told me when I order at the printer, I need to make sure that I have the majority of spiral books. And I did a pre-order on them. It did very well. And the books that were sold out were the spiral books. So making sure that your goals and the things in which your readers are telling you are important are actually implemented within the publishing process and not just as an afterthought after you've finished writing, finished editing, and you're like, okay, I'm ready to publish now. Think about it and be intentional. And so with that, you also want to think about the path that you want to integrate into what it is that you're already doing, or are you trying to create an extension or a new arm or new leg of your business? Once again, going back to that example of cookbook, I could have done cooking classes. I could have done monthly cooking classes as an offer, and that would just be a natural next step because people are wanting to actually learn the recipes. However, they might be finding that they are not always spending time doing that. They might be just saving a bunch of them on Pinterest or saving a bunch of them on Reels, and then they never actually go back and make the food. And so it could be something that inspires them. The same is true for your, I was about to say genre, but the same is true for your topic, for your area of expertise. You want to think about the global picture, the bigger picture of what it is that you're creating. So that way, when you actually complete it, it is something that supports your readers. And then lastly, we do all of this inside the Profitable Publishing Partner service. And so it's a space where you get to keep all your rights and royalties because you are the author and this is your book baby. You are paid directly through the distributors, so you're not having to go through myself or anyone on my team to be able to understand how much money did you make. And printing your own author copies, you're able to print your books at cost without markups. And that just helps you to also be able to sell on your site as well. And then lastly, we embed the marketing infrastructure into your publishing so that you can actually produce a marketable book instead of a book that's done without actually being something that you can sell. And so I hope this episode has been helpful. I'm going to go over the 5 red flags again because you do want to be aware of them. And so the first one is that your rights are not your own. So that means that your copyright, ISBN, those are under your publisher as opposed to yourself. Your checks are coming once a quarter as opposed to once a month, meaning that your publisher is distributing the check to you instead of just being able to get that check directly from sites like Amazon KDP or Ingham Spark. And then having to order your author copies only through the publisher. This can just really bog things down as well. They are sometimes going to mark those up. And then not having any marketing support and just assuming that if you have your book out, that it will be something that helps readers when in actuality they have to know that it's out in order to get that help. And then the last one was just kind of like a nice to have, and it's that your publisher is not prioritizing profit or not focusing on your ecosystem. All right, thank you for listening, and until next time, stay profitable.